we're so fortunate to be able to have on our Zoom the marvelous, incredible artist, ceramicist, textile artist, curator, an all-round real Renaissance man, Matt Smith, whose work, I'm happy to say, I'm surrounded by at the moment. And he is going to be joined in conversation with the wonderful Natalie Melton of the Crafts Council, who's the creative director of the Crafts Council. I believe that Matt and Natalie know each other well. And I think this is going to be a really exciting and interesting conversation. And hopefully it will be one of the most lively and fun Zoom talks that we have during this incredible time with Collect. And then there's going to be, I think, questions and answers at the end. And I'm going to be maybe doing a little tour around some of Matt's work at the request of Matt and Natalie. So without further ado, I hand over to these wonderful Matt and Natalie.
Thanks, Cynthia. What a lovely introduction.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Matt, hello.
Hello.
How are you? Where are you? Let's begin with the practical.
Where am I? I'm in a field in Ireland at the moment, in a house in a field in Ireland.
And that's not your usual habitat, is it?
Well, I teach in Stockholm, so I'm there a lot. But when the music stopped on lockdown, I was staying at a house that belongs to my partner's family, and we've just holed up here, and it's been quite lovely.
So have you been there for most of the year?
Yeah. I've learned a lot more about rural life, lessons I don't know what I'll do with after lockdown. And I've got access to a kiln. It's been a real joy to be here. And but yes, it's felt like a real change to normal life.
Well, I think certainly if we go back to the last time we saw each other for real a year ago at Collect.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
You know, that was quite a momentous occasion for you, wasn't it? Because you were the recipient of the inaugural Brookfields Property Prize. We had a wonderful series of acquisitions of your work via Cynthia, and you were just about to, open a wonderful exhibition at Pitt Rivers.
Yeah,
so the contrast is.
It's been a really odd 12 months. So the Brookfields Prize came out of the blue because nobody had ever heard of it and nobody knew it was happening. And then God, very, very humbling to be awarded that, and it meant that obviously I think 5 or 6 pieces got acquired into the Crafts Council collection, and to get a body of work in a public collection is, it's just very lucky. These things don't come around that often, so it's kind of nice to try and take the time to enjoy it. But almost as soon as Collect ended, Losing Venus, a solo show, opened at the Pitt Rivers, which I looked up the dates for today because I knew it was close to lockdown, but it opened on the 12th of March, and then the museums all shut on the 17th of March. So it had 4 glorious days after 2 years of work. But it's going to, once the museums reopen, they're going to have it for the 9 months of its planned show. So it's going to be back open when the museums open. But it was kind of, I was running at such a speed, and then, the music stopped. But, good things came out of it. There's nothing like being somebody who makes being stuck with nothing, with nowhere to go. It's what we do. A little bit of isolation and busyness. And I was fortunate we were planning to do a catalogue for the Losing Venus exhibition, and it gave me time to work with an amazing graphic designer, Una Young, on the production of that. So there's no way around it. It's been a terrible and disruptive period of time, but there's been some big silver linings as well.
Yeah, yeah, and great that things will pick up and reopen at Pitt Rivers. I guess you're waiting to find out exactly when that might be at the moment.
Yeah, actually, I think we've got a couple of images. I don't know if we can share screen on that one, Anastasia, of
Should I move this
Pitt
one?
Rivers images.
Of course. Just give me a moment.
But yeah, so I think at the moment, I think it's around the 17th of May. We're hoping museums will reopen, but
Yeah.
yeah, you're never sure. So the Losing Venus show was, I was interested. I'd seen two maps held up during a talk a few years ago, one of the British Empire in about 1920, and then a contemporary map of countries where it's illegal to be LGBTQ. And the two maps are incredibly similar. And I wanted to kind of unpick that a bit within the Pitt Rivers, which is a World Cultures museum. And they've got this huge collection of objects that Captain Cook acquired on his exploration in the South Pacific. And I wasn't sure what to do with the museum, and unpicking that, Captain Cook was funded to go to Tahiti to map the transit of the planet Venus, because then they could calculate the distance of the solar system by mapping it in two locations. And I just love this idea that he was paid to go and find the goddess of love. And then he went on to kind of lay claim to Australia and the South Pacific, which led on to British colonial in ways that weren't heterosexual or heteronormative. And that this journey to find the goddess of love ended up with an ongoing legacy around the world of people not being able to find love. And that kind of then started unpicking into how museums work and how we get left with the objects people owned or wore, but very little about who they loved or what their desires were. And the museum's got about 23 love tokens in its collection, and they're all catalogued by what they're made of or what size they are, and none of them talk about who gave them and who they gave them to. So we know everything about the love tokens except why they were given and whose love. Yeah. And so I was just interested in this idea of how we deal with these organizations that erase emotion and pull emotion out, and how we can start putting that back into these collections. And so we ended up, part of the exhibition, as well as recreating a Wedgwood dinner service for Captain Cook with kangaroos and all sorts of nonsense going on, were these screen prints. And they were taken from, I don't know if we could go on to the next slide, maybe, Anastasia. They were taken from photographs in the collections, and each photograph's from a country where the British imposed homophobic laws. And we've just erased the identity and the potential for desire from these photographs and replaced them with another background. So it's kind of the textiles that I showed at Collect last year drew on the work I've been doing in ceramics, and this then led on to the screen prints that happened here. So there's been this really organic kind of unplanned movement through media. And yeah, so these are probably in great condition. They've only been in daylight for 4 days, so they should be good when we reopen, hopefully.
There's not a huge amount of daylight in Pitt Rivers.
There's
anyway.
not a lot, really. No risk of direct sunlight.
Yeah, but it's all been sort of undercover and hidden away for a year, waiting to re-emerge.
And I got to say, talking of undercover, so these prints, if any's not been to the Pitt Rivers, it's stuffed full of objects. And when we came to display works, we ended up having to build a false wall in the museum. So these prints are all on a false wall that's in front of other objects, because that was easier than trying to take the objects away. So I just think there might be layers and layers of objects that we'll never get to in that museum, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I mean, the project involves all elements of your practice, doesn't it? From the kind of curation to the production of new works, using new sort of techniques and materials. Do you enjoy working across all those different spheres at once, or is it quite stressful?
Both, absolutely both. I absolutely adore it. That whole picking through a museum collection and seeing what it can tell you, or what it tries not to tell you, is endlessly fascinating. And then to make the objects that could never have been made at the time and inserting them back in, and working with how museums reflect society and reflect ourselves is just an absolute joy. And then you get to the point when you've actually got to make the stuff, and that terror sets in at that point. But you have a deadline and you've just got to get on with it, and it's great. It really it focuses you, and it makes you take risks that I would find harder to take just within the studio. There's something about having a deadline and a client and a space, and it being site specific, that it for me, it ups my game.
Yeah,
ups my game even.
Yeah. And you said you worked on this project for 2 years. Are you quite structured in how you approach that time frame? Don't laugh, Matt. It's a serious question. You're like, I'm going to spend 6 months doing nothing but looking at stuff, and then how do you break that kind of time frame down?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, going, because they're quite big exhibitions, so you end up needing to get funding, and the mechanics of getting a project like that off the ground, funded, agreed by the organization, takes up a lot of time. The idea, it depends on the project. With the Pitt Rivers, I knew these 2 maps had been with me for about 4 years, and so when I started talking with the museum, I knew there was something in there that I wanted to delve into. Whereas, say, with the Flux exhibition at the Fitzwilliam, they came to me with a collection of Parian busts and asked me to respond to it. And that was a good 12 months of trying to work out what I possibly had to say about these busts. And that, and to be honest, with the Flux exhibition, we went through a series of ideas, from looking at Belique, which is a Parian manufacturer that's right on the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So it's in a village that's going to be cut through by the Brexit debate, and whether that was something that was interesting to explore, looking at these Victorian Parian busts. And eventually we settled on it. British history obviously is a site of colonial genocide, and actually, can we do something playing with the Fitzwilliams country house aesthetic of bringing in some sort of chintz idea that deals with images of genocide around the world, and pulling out figures in this collection of busts that were acquired that were implicated in those genocides. So looking at what happens when these domestic busts that were venerating people in the 1850s, and seeing what happens with the passage of time, how our perceptions of these people changes over time. And little did I know what was going to happen with Edward Colston and Black Lives Matters, but it was a great show to work on. But again, about a year of just coming up with ideas and trying to work out which ones might work best, and then for this one, a year of implementation after that. So the quick answer is, I'd say there's 50% planning, 50% sheer terror, and it kind of
a little bit of work at the end.
Yeah, that's my sort of balance. That works for me.
It's like the dissertation at a university. I'm thinking. I need to get it done now. Yeah, well, with fantastic results. And I mean, I'm so excited. Well, as I said before, I shamefully haven't been to the Pitt Rivers Museum before, so I'm looking forward to seeing it with a fresh gaze, courtesy of you, when we can finally venture out. As you just alluded to, obviously your practice has been concerned with finding hidden narratives in museums for quite some time now. and obviously the kind of relationship that we have with monuments, with collections, and the debate that's raged over the last year following from Black Lives Matter must make the work that you've been doing, it must be, you know, for that debate to have become so active and dynamic over the last 12 months. How do you feel about that?
I'm delighted, really delighted, but also worried. I mean, there's with every push, there's a pushback, and you know, with Oliver Dowden in DCMS calling meetings of heritage bodies to talk about what he's saying is editing of history, and I would say is an opening up of history. I think it's I'm incredibly concerned about what sort of pushback there might be, and I think as a country, we in Britain have not been good at dealing with a lot of subjects, and I think it's going to be uncomfortable at times of being more honest and open about our history. So I'm both delighted the work's happening. I'm delighted more people are getting involved in the work. I just would like us to support each other going forwards in it. But it's nice to have some friends to play with. Back in 2010, Andy Horn at Birmingham Museum took a chance on me and let me do a show called Queering the Museum, where I kind of unpicked how museums exclude LGBT people and how they have great reasons for why it's so difficult to deal with LGBT people in museums. And I see Kate Quinlan's in here working away. And the show kind of unpicked those excuses. And I just remember at the time back in 2010, one, that museums hadn't been dealing with LGBT people in their curation, and also people my age, we've grown up with inbuilt homophobia. Section 28 made it very clear that we shouldn't be talking about ourselves and we shouldn't be talked about in any positive way. And to kind of do that jump to not only am I going to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it in a museum that's an establishment space was kind of a terrifying jump. And I do remember having about a year before the show went live thinking, I might have just stopped my career. This might be the one. I'll get a job in a bank. I can dress smartly. It'll be all right. The tills won't balance, but I'll get a job in a bank. It'll be fine.
Well, I'm really glad you didn't.
Well, I'm glad I didn't. Honestly, the financial crash happened without me. So, you know, I wasn't needed there. It's been really interesting. Museums and cultural organizations, I think, have become a lot better at talking about difference and talking about difficult histories. And it's nice to feel there's more of us about at the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the ways in which they can start to continually engage with those debates is around acquisition of new works.
Yeah.
And I guess you know, I was delighted to see that the V&A have acquired a piece by Chris Day, the Emmett Till piece from
good,
Beck,
so good,
just wonderful. But of course, there's a sort of existential threat to museums and acquisitions of collections, because the sort of gathering clouds of funding cuts and decline in revenue inevitably will put pressure on collection acquisition at a time when it's probably even more important to ensure that we're reflecting work that's being made now, post-pandemic and in the wake of the pandemic and Black Lives Matter. It's going to be tough, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I don't know how. I look at the States and they seem very good at what would be the right word? Empowering private individuals to give money for acquisitions to museums, or developing collections that are then given to museums. And I'm absolutely not advocating for governments not to fund museums or acquisitions, but I do wonder if there's a role in the UK for private money as well to support acquisitions at times when finances are tight. It would be, and it brings trouble, it brings difficulties as well. But I've seen things like the V&A residencies are funded by individual people, but the makers are selected by the V&A independently. And it just seems like a great model that I think the donors get something out of it, and the V&A gets to do more work than it normally would be able to financially.
Yeah, I think it's I was sort of chairing a discussion earlier, and we were talking about one of the sort of real shifts over the last 12 months in the art market is that motivations for buying art and craft amongst a younger generation, that one of the strongest motivators is that notion of patronage, that they want to support artists. So, you know, whilst they're buying work and, you know, enjoying it in their homes, actually there's a very strong sense of, I recognise that artists are having a particularly challenging time at the moment, and I want to do what I can to support them and sustain their livelihoods when so many avenues have been locked off. And that's one of the kind of key drivers amongst that sort of younger buying audience on online. And I think, you know, there's something really interesting to explore in terms of how do we tap into that sense of purpose that's coming with new buyers, and thinking about whether there are opportunities for works to be acquired for collections, but as you say, recognizing that there's a nice sort of feel-good factor for patrons to be able to support in that way.
Yeah, and I think going back to Chris, who you were talking about before, the glass artist, is I think if somebody sees that someone like Chris relatively early on in his career has been acquired into the V&A and is getting recognition, it gives you a sense that there is a space for other people, and it kind of just makes it a much more open field. And the art world is a tough field. It's tough to get recognition, and it's tough to make a living. And I think to see people make it or to get recognized, I think makes it much more of an accessible space for people.
Yeah, and it's about the institutions being relevant as well to contemporary issues, debates and discussions, and acknowledging that, you know, it's perhaps bringing some of that emotion into the collections that you found so sorely lacking in the way that perhaps some collections were acquired and managed for a long time. And I think that's a very powerful dynamic between audience and object, isn't it?
I think it's also interesting with kind of going back to somewhere like the V&A, which I absolutely adore, so I need to put that on the table, but they acquire objects from a relatively tight percentage of the UK. You're not getting a lot of working class objects in the V&A, and that kind of reflects back on who feels welcome and who wants to go into these organizations. And I think there's some really difficult questions to be asked about what's being acquired and what impact that's having on who feels that these organizations are relevant to them.
Well, who's making the decisions about acquisition? And I think there is, you know, different models in considering who the voices are that input into that discussion that I think could be quite fruitful and interesting. But we've got to find the resources to be able to facilitate that, haven't we?
Yeah. It's but yeah, big shout out actually to the people at the V&A who have got a tough few months ahead of them by the looks of it in the press.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you've made over the last 12 months? You said you've been reasonably productive and very few distractions apart from the cows, perhaps?
There's, apart from the cows. Yeah, I don't know if we can go on a slide or two, Anastasia. So this was, actually, if we can go back a slide, that would be great. Yeah. So as Natalie mentioned, I was awarded the Brookfield Award, which not only acquired work in, but comes with a show at Brookfield Properties in London, and Anna Ray took my crown away from me this week, which I'm delighted for her. But this was the show that Annabel Campbell, the curator and head of exhibitions at the Crafts Council, worked on with me. And we, being someone who works generally in response to museums, getting the atrium of an office block was a bit of a learning curve. And we kind of talked quite a bit about how we somehow get some of the aesthetic of museums and archives back in, and we talk about roller racking, and we ended up borrowing these showcases that used to be in a ceramics museum, and we placed them in the space and put work over the last 10 years in, and then hung newer textile pieces on the wall, as well as screen prints from the Pitt Rivers. So it was a kind of, it was a group of objects from the last 10 years brought together, and it was kind of, yeah, it was quite interesting to have objects from different shows brought together in a new environment. But then if we go on a slide, sorry, Anastasia. I can see some of you, I've just seen Lucille, hello. Sorry, it's really nice to see people. So this piece I always say we, I don't know who else is working with me. I made for the Brookfields Prize, and it's one of the textiles. So it's a needlepoint piece that I bought and then unpicked parts of it and restitched into it. And I've been interested in that idea of feminist and queer readings of texts and films, talking about the interesting people tend to be the marginal characters. And so I was kind of interested in taking out the main people in these textiles and playing with the idea of these being usually based on classical paintings and then turned into hobby kits, usually made by women. And then I get hold of them as a named artist and unpick them and restitch them. And I just quite like the perversity of this bouncing about between fine art and craft, and amateur and professional, and through gender. And I like the way that when the faces get taken out, there's nowhere to kind of rest your eyes. You can bounce around the pictures a bit more. If we can go on to the next slide, maybe.
Can we just before?
And then, oh yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Can I ask you?
No, yeah, come on.
With the textiles, because you've got a whole series of works that reference the artist from which the work was taken,
yeah.
Or the needlepoint was based on. Was there sort of a train of thought about? Were you just buying up what you could? Were you looking for very specific artists because they had a particular resonance to you?
Yeah, you are kind of guided by what was popular in the 1970s amateur hobby craft market. So there's a lot of Boucher, there's a lot of Rococo, but then a lot of it's based on seeing what comes up and what visually could work well, so there are some that come up that are beautiful, but they just wouldn't translate well into the languages I want to work with. So it's a bit of all of that, really.
Have you got a massive stock of second hand?
I've got a little bit of a stash in my cupboard. There's now and again really large ones come up, like the Boucher one, and yeah, there's a bit of an eBay frenzy when, well, it's just me actually, me getting very overexcited. Yeah.
I mean, because they're huge. I mean, it's quite a time-consuming, to be unpicking and, do you enjoy the kind of meditative qualities of it?
I'd have to, wouldn't I? I'd really have to. Yeah, I don't. It probably doesn't come across in this image, but they're all individual stitches that get unpicked. So
yeah, in
each of those squares, the pink squares, there's probably about 100 stitches in each of those. So yeah, the stitching takes a while. It's the unpicking that really kills you, though.
Yeah. Because you just want to rip it out, and
you might.
Sorry. You're much more precise and careful than I would be.
Yeah, okay. lockdown has been my friend on these works. That's all I
Yeah.
can say.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, it's going to be interesting when I can start going out and seeing people again. How many I'm after that point, but yeah, they've kept me busy during lockdown.
They're beautiful.
And then also, thank you. Also, fortunately, having access to a kiln while I've been here, I've made some more ceramic works for Collect, and we're showing a couple of pieces from the Flux show as well. So yeah, it's been I feel it's been a lucky time to have quiet and be able to make and be productive. But I would really love to see people a bit more.
Yeah, not long now. I think we all feel like we're itching for that.
I think I've got another 3 textiles in me before lockdown ends.
Oh gosh, that's quite a lot then. I mean, you're going at quite a pace.
I don't hang around.
Can you watch television at the same time, or are you completely?
I'm not going to answer that question. But maybe.
Netflix viewing list after we finish the discussion, please, Mark.
We can. It'll be in the chat. Don't worry.
Do you want to? Should we flick through to the other?
Yeah, and I wonder if Cynthia's feeling active, whether she'd be willing to nip through to the yellow room, which shows some of the works. I've got to say, hats off to all the galleries at Collect who have really done their best to show work in as real life as possible. And when we started talking about Collect, and Cynthia said she wanted work actually with her for a show, I've got to say I was a little bit, really? Is that not a lot of? And I've got to say, I think it's really helped just to view stuff rather than, especially 3D objects, to see them in the round rather than just from photographs.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed in the lead up, well, throughout the pandemic, but particularly in the lead up to Collect, is, you know, the galleries really sort of bringing the work to life, utilising their spaces, whether that's their homes or their galleries, because you still crave that context, don't you? And to see how works sit with one another is still a really important part of it, even if you can't actually see them physically yourself. So it's that sort of intermediary step, which is great. We're going straight in.
We're going in, and also Cynthia's showing work by Amy Hughes this year, and just the images were great. Then to see them in a room, I'm not surprised they've gone quickly. They're stunning.
Yeah, they are. They're fantastic. They've got such an energy to them. Oh.
So so I don't know if behind you, where you are, Cynthia, just maybe you could show a few of the ceramics on the walls might be useful.
Yeah, so the curation, and Matt and myself and the team worked on this because we knew what we had to, we had an area to work with, 2 different areas in the home. And so we tried to recreate as best we could, having the textiles and the ceramics, you know, working together and talking together. And I think this is just, you know, it's in a magnificent space for the After Boucher. And it was a lot of, I think the curation, wouldn't you say, Matt, was also inspired by, you know, how well the textiles and ceramic pieces worked together last year at Collect. And so you know, it's really, I think, just so fantastic. And look at, you know, if you look at the pearls here, you know, it's just incredible with the spouts and your found objects with your, you know, your Parion, Black Parion. This one, the Shepherdess, I think is just, it's just luscious, gorgeous, amazing. I love it.
Oh,
and then maybe you can, you know, I do. You can go up to the hunter as well. I love the juxtaposition of the, the hunter, what he's doing, and then the crane here.
I've got to say the hunter nearly didn't come to you, Cynthia.
It didn't? What? Why?
Well, I was putting him up on the wall at home and thinking, is this one I'm going to keep for myself? And then
Yeah, I'm not
so
surprised.
my partner just kind of said, yeah, there was a showdown in the house, which is you've got him. But what I find interesting with Collect and with the museum shows, they're usually quite controlled about where stuff can go, and things are signed off a long time in advance. And with Collect, I'll have a body of work. But last year was the first time the textiles and ceramics showed together, and it was just really great because I'm not there during installation, and you go into Collect, you never know quite what it's going to be like. And Cynthia and the team had done a really lovely job, I think, of marrying the two bodies of work together, that they made real sense in a way that I hadn't expected before I got in there. So sometimes it's nice to relinquish control and just see what happens. So,
well, I guess it's could be particularly challenging for you because you're still curating. It's still so much a part of your practice, isn't it? To hand your work over to somebody else and not quite know what the outcome's going to be, I would imagine is a little bit nerve-wracking.
yeah, nerve-wracking. Yeah, there is a bit of apprehension each time, but wherever the show is, things always get moved around at the last minute, and you're never quite sure.
Am I on mute?
No, you're not.
No,
Do you want me to move in? Do you want me to move in the other room?
Yeah,
No, I
if you'd
just
like
want to comment on that yellow, because actually it's everything sings against that, doesn't it? And I think that's one of the lovely things about seeing it in a more domestic setting.
Yeah, well, I have to say that the color yellow we chose for this room, I saw this yellow in Monet's house in Germany, and when we moved in here in 1998, and I just said I have to find this yellow and recreate that feeling, because it's just such a positive feeling.
Yeah.
And work really does it just, as you say, it just sings against the walls.
Is colour important to you, Matt, in your work?
Yeah, well,
or absence of sometimes.
Yeah, what is it within my personal space? So at home, colour's really important, and it's,
you can look at the colors.
yeah, I think more almost I'm interested in how the work bounces against certain colours, and the white work in this room I think looks really nice against the powder blue. But I would be one of those really annoying people that would repaint a room to make it look good against the work. So it's good I can't travel at the moment. I think that's
Would you be there with a paintbrush?
God, how annoying would that be? But yeah, I'd go for it. But yeah, I've made mistakes. So I had a show with Aspects Gallery in Portsmouth years ago, and I just said, let's paint it all bubblegum pink, and they did, and it's a terrible decision. I mean, hats off to them for going with it, but I've learned that sometimes think twice, say once.
Could you correct it, or did you have to leave with bubblegum pink? That was it.
No, I had to pretend I was really convinced it was the right thing to do.
Never again.
Yeah, learn from that.
Is there anywhere else you want us to move to, particular, Matt and Natalie?
Maybe the parrots with plates would be nice, Cynthia, if you can do that.
We talk about, if you go just maybe here, so that's a good distance, and maybe Matt can talk about that.
So yeah, these were made for Collect, and do you know, it seems they were just incredibly annoying to make. The plate, they're all one piece, so the plates aren't resting. They're all made in one piece and glazed, and the stresses that come about during the firing meant that the failure rate was really high on these.
Why did you
So,
want to make them all as one piece?
yeah, I should have asked myself that before I started making them, shouldn't I? What did I think there was something about, why did I want to make, I don't know. Looking back, I shouldn't have at all, should I? But at the time it seemed important.
But then did you learn, were you learning through the failure, you know, every time one went wrong?
I think with ceramics, you learn through failure all the time. And actually, that's one nice thing about the textiles. They take a long time to make, but you know what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas any ceramicist listening in, Kate Quinlan, will know that things go horribly wrong during firings quite often. And it's at the last minute when you spent days and days working on something, it comes out and there's a crack, and it's a tough medium, but it's endlessly interesting.
Yeah, but the jeopardy within it is immense, isn't it? Particularly if you're creating very significant challenges for yourself through the making process, to then put it in the kiln and not quite know what's going to happen. I think I would be a nervous wreck.
I've got to say, it really makes me admire other ceramicists, and you see kind of how much skill and knowledge goes into what they're doing.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to have a look around, browse around Collect so far this year?
I have indeed.
And what's caught your eye?
Oh my God,
That's a
really tough question. Amy's work here, I've got to say, blew me away. It's like Betty Woodman has come back in Amy Hughes' body. They're fantastic. They're really, really
go over there just so they can see the sense of scale. Like, I mean, they're like, they just nice. It's like no quantity.
I'd like to catch that on camera.
For me, I said,
I think we have. Is anybody recording this?
Yeah, caught on camera.
I'm afraid I am, Matt. I'm afraid I am.
Because they're just so like, because Amy finished these when she was just about to give birth. You know,
of course.
She was nearly 9 months pregnant when she finished these. I just think they're just so sexy.
And again, Cynthia's just created her own meme there, hasn't she?
It's our job here is done. But yeah, no, there's something incredible. I mean, I'm really enjoying Oxford Ceramics program well, Alveston Fine Art, Jagged Art.
There's a lot of good. I mean, the nice thing is that I feel like I can take my time to really look at individual selections of work, and actually, you know, the without an audience, without lots of people that you're bumping into, without all the hugging, which I'm desperately missing, but actually to be able to really sit and look at the work, I'm really finding very satisfying.
I think the other thing I've realized, there are some artists that I will see every year at Collect, and some of them are showing and some of them aren't showing this year, and usually you'd see them, and I'm just missing being able to say, "Are you all right, hon?" to people that you haven't seen for a while, and that's been just that catching up and making sure everybody's okay. I'm missing a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the lovely things about Collect, is that you do see the evolution of people's practice over a number of years, don't you? You know, there's something really wonderful about being able to see how people's work is evolving over a long period of time, which I really enjoy. You know, love it, seeing how Andrea Walsh's such beautifully quiet work, but actually year on year there's just something that's changed and shifted in the way that she's thinking about the materials, which is always so exciting to see.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we could probably talk for hours, but I think there's quite a lot of interest in questions in the chat room. And I'm wondering if you two would be okay if we opened it up to questions soon.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, can we start with easy questions? Would that be okay?
Okay, am I going to read them, or Natalie, can you read them?
I don't mind doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't promise that I'm going to be able to scan all the questions and pick out the easy ones, but I will.
There is one quite an
try.
easy one. There is an easy one from Emma Davis, who's asking the obvious question about the ceramics. Cone heads, ball heads, sphere heads. Is there a why?
Yeah, I think there's probably lots of whys. I think partly I'm a huge fan of Lynn Chadwick, the sculptor, and
Me too.
I know his prints are affordable. I mean, his sculpture isn't, but it's just tipped from the top there. But there's also that I think
No, that'd be a wish list
there's
item.
also the idea of silencing and removing voices. I did some flatbacks for the Potteries Museum for the BCB a couple of years ago and realized that cone heads kind of oscillate between, they can be a bit smiley, a bit Easter figure, a bit Ku Klux Klan. And this, I think when you get this ambiguity of masking, they're very hard to read in one specific way. And I think open them up into quite an awkward place that I enjoy, that you're not sure quite whether you should respond with warmth or with fear. And I'm quite comfy with that ambiguity. So maybe that would be, yeah.
Okay. There's a question from Sue Malvern that is asking a bit about author. Can you tell us a bit about authorship? So you have Boucher, the anonymous stitcher, your intervention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of, yeah. There is that naming that happens and doesn't happen. And it drags through from the art world that we get artists coming in and out of the canon, and particularly privileging men historically. But then also I think when we look at museum collections, it's not only authorship of making, but authorship of ownership, and how museums tend to pull objects away from the people who owned or loved them and put them into taxonomies that work for the organization. That I think I keep coming back to the personal, about who and what did they feel and why were they doing things. And our cultural organizations seem to not particularly love talking about that too much. So I think it's going to keep me busy for a while.
Yeah.
And I had a kind of related question, I think. Sorry, am I allowed to interrupt?
I think you have. Go on, Emma.
Yeah,
Hello.
Emma, I was going for your question.
I was going to interrupt, then ask later, because I think it's very related, and it's really about who you're empathizing with, who you're connecting with when you're remaking the tapestries. Whether that's the original artist, the way that sort of, if you copy a painting in a gallery, you're very much working through that original work, and you work, it's a laborious process, but you somehow get to understand the composition and the color and sort of the mind of the artist they're making it. But for you, are you sort of emphasizing, are you finding you end up with this understanding of a Boucher picture, or are you sort of more emphasizing with the sort of the original tapestry maker, the hobbyist who sat there and copied it? It's this sort of durational thing.
I think maybe it's not empathy for either so much, but more trying to put them on a more equal level by emphasizing the handmade quality of these images, that you can't read them just as copies of paintings anymore. You have to read them as distortions of paintings that have been handmade. And so I think it's maybe that disruption, that they belong to neither the hobbyist nor the original artist, but they talk of both. And so that these works constantly talk about fine art and craft, and constantly talk of gender, and constantly talk about visibility and invisibility and authorship. And I'd hope that, I mean, I'm conscious of the irony that they end up getting sold under my name. So there does become a hierarchy, comes back into it at the last moment. but I'm hoping it's a more disrupted hierarchy than happens earlier on down the line. That's what I'm aiming for. I don't know if I'm achieving it. Thanks, Emma. Great question.
Question from
I
Ruth.
think you're achieving it. It's making me think of the work of the tapestry maker as a work of art creation rather than a work of sort of copying. So it's nice. Thank you.
I'll take
Sorry.
that one. No, it's good. Thank you.
Do you think about the person who's made the tapestry? Do you construct kind of fictional narratives about these people?
I have fights with some of them. There's nothing like unpicking somebody else's work to realize how organized or disorganized that. So there are some tapestry people out there, they're just a big hot mess, I've realized. That you turn the tapestries over and they're all over the place. And I quite like them secretly, but yeah, it does become quite personal. You see how somebody has addressed, how somebody has got a task done in their own unique way, and yeah, they're all really now and again you get one that's just beautifully made and beautifully easy to unpick, but mostly they're not like that, and you end up having quite a dialogue with the person who's made them.
And presumably they're not coming directly from that person. They've passed into the hands of an eBay seller, or so there's the link is broken.
And yeah, and interestingly, they I get there's a big dealer in Pakistan. I don't know why, and another big one in Israel. And I don't know why these. I think if I did, without thinking about it, I thought there's probably somebody in the French Parisian suburbs with all these textiles, but they've really gone globally. It's yeah. I don't know why they've ended up where they've ended up, but yeah.
Well, there's a really poetic film in there, I think. Ruth Siggers asked a question about whether you do or would collaborate with other makers.
Hello, Ruth, by the way. Do I? Yes. Yeah, the screen prints were a real collaboration. I worked with Vaughan and Dan at Tin Dogs Printing, and that was a really interesting process too. They've got such skill as printmakers, and how we transferred a concept and images across. And I've worked with a few people on larger projects, and yeah, I'd love to. There's I think as makers we can often be quite isolated, and there's a real joy, especially when it's a creative collaboration rather than just subcontracting work out. Yeah, it would be an absolute joy to do that in the future.
Was that your first foray into printmaking? Had you done prints before?
I've done like an evening course years ago, but yeah, no, I'm not the person to leave alone in a print studio. Yeah, it would be hilarious, but it would be a lot of clearing up afterwards.
So do we have any more questions, Natalie, or what?
I think there's Emma, do we want to go back to your question about the influence of patronage or philanthropy? Shall we pick that thorny chestnut up?
I just wondered whether there was any danger or risk of that, where you could see different kinds of unconscious biases being introduced into museum collections as a result of them being defined by a particular collection or collector.
Yeah, and I think you can see that in historic collections in museums, that they'll often be slanted towards the desires of one particular collector. I think that if patronage goes up, I think keeping it at arm's length and keeping the authority for curatorial decisions within the organization, with the people who have been employed because of their skill in making decisions, I think is really important. But yeah, it's not a subject without difficulty.
I think there's always a tension, isn't there, about control to some extent and influence. I think that's an age-old challenge. I guess that's where things like, Cynthia, I know you referenced the Contemporary Art Society.
Rapid Response Fund. Yes.
And not to become really powerful, because they're mechanisms for kind of gathering funds together and then making much more sort of unpoliticized decisions about what should be acquired, because it's the power of the group, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. That's why I put it in the chat room. The Contemporary Art Society did the Freeze Rapid Response Fund, and what they did is it was really fantastic, because they reached out to organizations and public museums and said, what are you searching for? What are you missing? What do you want? And that was really that's a great initiative. And I think that aspect of going out to the various bodies that could use that funding, because it would be great if we could all rely on private patronage to provide artifacts and really great artworks for some of these institutions, large and small. But we can't always do that, can we? So I think it's both. I think private patronage is more and more going to be important, I think, as we go through the next recovery period. And I did make a point in the chat room too about America, because the United States has been built on a lot of private philanthropy, but a lot of that as well is because they have so much tax incentive. So yes, they're a great philanthropist, and we're really, the institutions are grateful for that. But I think it's also, there are some incentives. So I think the more, if there is funding available through, through initiatives like the Rapid Response Fund, I think that would really help the situation.
Yeah. It feels
What do you
like
think, Matt?
Well, it feels like a really healthy intermediary where the Contemporary Art Society have got really established curators who can help not only act as an intermediary between the artist and the patron and the eventual collection that the work goes into. It's a great model.
Well, I think, I guess I've just been told the time. I think the time has really flown by, and I want to thank so much all of you who've attended. I will have to say that this is the largest audience we've had so far. So I think Matt and Natalie, you are very popular. And I think
I paid people, actually.
You did you? Well,
checks in the post, everyone.
Well, it was really, I thank you both so much. As always, Matt, it's just a great privilege and
thanks,
just
Cynthia.
honor to show your work, and great fun as well. And thank you so much for all your hard work. And Natalie, you and all of you at the Crafts Council, you've just been immense. I have to say, this is my 5th collect, and it's also my 5th virtual art fair.
Oh my God.
And all I can say to you and the Crafts Council and Collect and everyone is that you guys have done such an amazing job. And I think
really,
all of us are incredibly grateful to you. So thank you very much. And thanks so much. And all of you who are watching, whether you're makers or artists or philanthropists or collectors or just art lovers, really appreciate your support. And we're always available to chat and Zoom, both, in a larger or smaller setting. So
I feel like there should be a group outing to the Pitt Rivers Museum when it opens as well.
I can
Yes.
hire a bus. I'm just saying. I've just
Only
seen-
if you've got a microphone and you're giving us a guided tour on the way
It's
there.
not a word. And I've just seen Maria Rivens has just mentioned something in the chat. Can I just do a big loving shout out to Maria?